He was already dead before anyone fired a shot. On October 14, 1944, at approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a dark green staff car pulled away from a quiet house in the German village of Herrlingen. Inside sat Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the most famous German soldier alive, the man the British press had called a military genius, the man Winston Churchill had praised on the floor of the House of Commons. Two generals sat on either side of him, deliberately so that he could not open the doors. The car drove for 15 minutes. It stopped on a deserted road in a grove of trees, far from any witnesses. 20 minutes later, the phone rang at the house they had just left. Rommel's adjutant picked it up. A voice on the other end said that Field Marshal Rommel had suffered a collapse, that he had died of a brain hemorrhage, that the injuries from Normandy had finally caught up with him. His son Manfred, 15 years old, stood in the room and knew it was a lie. The world would not learn the truth for years. What had happened on that road? What had really happened in the 45 minutes before Rommel walked out of his house for the last time is one of the most extraordinary and devastating stories to emerge from the Second World War. It is the story of a man who had survived battlefields from France to North Africa to Normandy, who had outmaneuvered British generals, outsmarted Allied intelligence, and earned the admiration of enemies on 3 continents, only to be quietly, efficiently, secretly murdered by his own government. This is the story of October 14, 1944, of the 2 men who came to the door, of the choice they brought with them, and of what it cost to be Erwin Rommel. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now is a good time. We cover military history the way it deserves to be covered, with the details that matter, the human cost at the center of every story, and nothing invented. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. To understand how a field marshal ends up on a quiet road with a cyanide capsule in his hand, you have to go back to the beginning. Erwin Rommel was born on November 15, 1891, in Württemberg, in southern Germany, the same rural, hard-working region where he would one day be buried. His father was a schoolteacher. There were no soldiers in his bloodline, no military tradition to follow. He chose the army the way some men choose a vocation, because he sensed it was what he was built for. He was commissioned as an officer in 1912, and when the First World War came, he confirmed every instinct he'd ever had about himself. He fought in France, Romania, and the Italian Alps. He was wounded multiple times. He led attacks so audacious that his superiors often didn't know what to do with the reports. In 1917, at the Battle of Caporetto, he captured more than 9,000 Italian soldiers and 81 artillery pieces in a single action with a force of roughly 100 men. For this, he received Imperial Germany's highest military decoration, the Pour le Mérite, the Blue Max. Between the wars, he taught at military academies and wrote a textbook, Infantry Attacks, that became required reading in armies across Europe, including, it would later be noted, the U.S. Army. When the Second World War began, he was given command of the 7th Panzer Division during the invasion of France in 1940. His division moved so fast, so unpredictably, that even his own headquarters frequently lost track of where he was. The French called it a ghost division. The Germans just called it Rommel. Then came North Africa. In February 1941, with Mussolini's forces collapsing under British pressure in Libya, Hitler sent Rommel to stabilize the front. He had arrived with orders to defend. He attacked instead, immediately, before his forces were even fully assembled, because he had looked at the terrain, looked at the enemy, and concluded that the only rational thing to do was strike while they were disorganized. Within 2 weeks, he had driven the British back toward Egypt. Within months, he had made himself a legend. The campaign that followed, across the burning sands of Libya and Egypt, would last nearly 2 years. It was a war of sweeping advances and sudden reversals, of tank battles fought in landscapes so featureless that armies could appear from any direction. Rommel won battles that should not have been won. He took Tobruk in June 1942, a fortress the British had held for 9 months, and was promoted to Field Marshal the same day, the youngest in the German army. He drove toward the Suez Canal with the battered remnants of an undersupplied force, 90 miles from Alexandria at the very edge of what was possible. And then he lost. The Second Battle of El Alamein, October and November 1942. Bernard Montgomery arrived with a rebuilt British Eighth Army, better supplied, better rested, and numerically superior by a factor that Rommel could not overcome. The Africa Corps had run out of everything: fuel, ammunition, men. By November, it was retreating. By March 1943, Rommel was gone from Africa, evacuated on medical grounds, his army destroyed behind him. Over 248,000 Axis soldiers marched into Allied captivity. He never returned. What is important to understand about the mythology of Rommel is that even his enemies loved him. The British press had called him the Desert Fox, and meant it with something close to admiration. Churchill, in the House of Commons in January 1942, at the height of Rommel's North African campaign, said of him, "We have a very daring and skillful opponent against us, and may I say across the havoc of war, a great general." It was the kind of tribute a politician almost never pays to an enemy in the middle of a war. Rommel had earned it. His Africa Corps was never charged with war crimes. He treated prisoners with humanity. He ignored orders he found dishonorable, and in Germany he was something closer to sacred. Goebbels' propaganda machine had turned him into the embodiment of German martial virtue: brave, brilliant, incorruptible. When he walked into Berlin's Sports Palace in 1942, thousands of officers rose to their feet. He was the one name in the German military that the public trusted completely. This would become, in the end, his death warrant. By 1944, Rommel had been reassigned to France. His job was to organize the coastal defenses against the Allied invasion that everyone knew was coming. He buried millions of landmines, erected beach obstacles, ordered the flooding of low-lying fields, and drove his engineers relentlessly. He disagreed bitterly with his superiors about strategy. He believed the invasion had to be defeated on the beach in the first 24 hours, or it could not be defeated at all. He was right. They did not listen. D-Day came on June 6, 1944. The Allies landed, broke through the coastal defenses, and began the slow, grinding push inland through the Bocage country of Normandy. Rommel fought with everything he had, but he was being bled white. In mid-August 1944, he confided to his 15-year-old son Manfred what he had seen. "I have never fought with such losses. Casualty reports, wherever you went, and the worst of it is that it was all without sense or purpose." By that summer, Rommel had reached a conclusion that he could no longer avoid. Germany was going to lose the war. Hitler would not negotiate. Hitler would not accept reality. And every day that the war continued, more men died for nothing. Rommel had begun, cautiously, to make contact with others who felt the same. He had been approached in early 1944 by a circle of German officers and civilians who were planning something drastic. Their leader was Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. Their plan was to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Rommel's precise role in what became known as the July 20th plot remains debated by historians. Most believe he was sympathetic to the goal, but initially opposed to assassination, preferring instead that Hitler be arrested and tried. What is documented is that he was in contact with key conspirators, that he had discussed the possibility of opening surrender negotiations with the Western Allies, that men who knew him believed he would act when the moment came. He never got the chance. On July 17, 1944, while driving back from an inspection of the front near Saint-Foy de Montgomery in Normandy, Rommel's staff car was attacked by Allied fighters. The driver was hit. The car careened off the road. Rommel was thrown from the vehicle and struck the pavement with tremendous force. 3 skull fractures. His left eye was paralyzed. Professor Albrecht, the ophthalmologist who examined him afterward, reportedly said, "I shall have to revise my lectures. No man can be alive with wounds like that." He survived. Barely. He was brought home to Herrlingen to recover. His left eye slowly began to move again. He took walks in the garden with Manfred. He watched the summer turn to autumn from the window of a house that had begun to feel, in ways he could not quite articulate, like a trap. 3 days after the attack on Rommel's car, on July 20th, 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg walked into a briefing room at Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. He placed a briefcase containing a bomb under the conference table. He left the room. The bomb exploded. Hitler survived. A table leg had absorbed the blast. What followed was the most savage purge of the German military since the Night of the Long Knives. Over 7,000 people were arrested. Nearly 5,000 were executed. Many of them hanged slowly with piano wire from meat hooks, filmed for Hitler's private viewing. The trials were run by Roland Freisler, the president of the People's Court, who screamed at the accused and stripped them of their dignity before condemning them to death. Among those arrested was General Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, the military commander in France. He had been in contact with Rommel. As he was being transported to Berlin for interrogation, he attempted to shoot himself. He survived, but the bullet had blinded him. In his delirium as he was treated for his wounds, the dying man muttered a name over and over, apparently unable to stop himself: Rommel. Later, another conspirator, Caesar von Hofacker, broke under torture and named Rommel directly. The civilian resistance had even listed Rommel as a potential president of the post-Hitler German government, though this had never been discussed with him. On September 27, 1944, Hitler's personal secretary Martin Bormann submitted a formal memorandum to the Führer. The testimony of multiple conspirators, he wrote, implicated Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Hitler read it. He understood immediately what it meant and what it could not mean. He could not put Erwin Rommel on trial before Roland Freisler's People's Court. Rommel was too popular, too beloved, too much a part of how Germany thought of itself. A public trial would be catastrophic. A public execution would be unthinkable. But he could not let Rommel live either. So Hitler chose a third path. On the morning of October 14, 1944, Rommel woke early. He had breakfast with his son. They walked together in the garden. The linden trees had gone golden, the autumn light slanting through the Swabian hills the way it always did at this time of year. Rommel's left eye was still not fully right. He walked with the careful deliberateness of a man who had survived something that should have killed him and knew it. As they walked, he looked out along the edge of the property. He counted quietly. 5 trucks, armed men in civilian clothes. Every road out of the village was blocked. He told Manfred that 2 generals from Berlin were arriving at noon, that most of his friends had already been arrested or executed, that he was worried. At 12 o'clock exactly, a dark green car with a Berlin license plate stopped at the garden gate. General Wilhelm Burgdorf stepped out first. He was one of Hitler's personal adjutants, a man who occupied the specific role of serving as the link between the Führer and his senior officers. Behind him came General Ernst Meisel. Both were in full-dress uniform. Both offered formal salutes. Rommel received them in his study. What happened in that room over the next 45 minutes was witnessed by no one else. But afterward, Rommel told his family, and from his wife Lucie and his son Manfred and his old adjutant Hermann Aldinger, who had fought beside him as an infantryman in the First World War, the account was preserved. Burgdorf presented the charges, the names of the conspirators who had named him, the evidence that had been compiled, and then the terms. There were formally 3 options. Rommel could travel to Berlin and present his defense personally to Hitler. He could face the People's Court, but Burgdorf made clear what that meant. His entire staff would be arrested. His family would fall under the Nazi principle of Sippenhaft, collective punishment, meaning his wife and son would be held responsible for his alleged crimes. The trial would be public, the outcome certain, and the aftermath devastating for everyone around him. Or he could accept the cyanide capsule that Burgdorf had brought with him. In that case, his death would be announced as a natural result of his Normandy wounds. He would receive a full state funeral with military honors. His family would be protected. His staff would be left alone. He had 10 minutes to decide. Rommel asked to speak with his family. The generals agreed, on condition that no one tell anyone what had occurred. They stayed in the study while Rommel moved through his house for the last time. He went to his son first. "Manfred," he said in a voice Manfred would later describe as strangely steady, "I will be dead in 15 minutes. Manfred, shocked, asked the question any 15-year-old would ask. "Can't we fight? Can't we defend ourselves?" Rommel shook his head. "It would be pointless. Better one to die than for all of us to be killed in a shooting affray. Besides, we have almost no ammunition." Then he looked at his son and said the words that Manfred would carry for the rest of his long life. "To die at the hands of one's own people is hard, but the house is surrounded and Hitler is charging me with high treason." He went upstairs to say goodbye to his wife Lucie. "I will be dead in 15 minutes, he told her. "On behalf of the Führer, I have been given a choice: poison or the People's Court. They have brought the poison with them. It will be fatal in 3 seconds. Lucy Rommel could barely speak. "Do you believe their promises?" she asked. "Yes," Rommel said, "I believe it. It is very much in their interest that this affair does not come out into the open." Finally, he found Hermann Aldinger, his friend, his adjutant, the man who had fought with him in the mud of the First World War. Aldinger was furious. He was more willing to die fighting for his general than to stand by and watch. Rommel had to calm him down. "I have to go," Rommel said. "They only gave me 10 minutes. He put on his Afrika Korps tunic. He picked up his field marshal's baton, the one Hitler had given him in 1942 at the height of his glory. He put on his leather overcoat. At the garden gate, he paused once to stop his Dachshund from following him. His last gestures to his son and to his old friend were 2 quick handshakes. Nothing more was possible. Neighbors were watching from their windows. Then Rommel got into the car. SS driver Heinrich Deuss sat behind the wheel. Bergdorf and Meisel sat on either side of Rommel in the back seat, positioned deliberately to prevent him from reaching the door handles. The car drove out of Herrlingen, away from the town of Ulm, into the hills. It stopped in a grove of trees on a deserted road. Deuss would later write that Meisel walked him away from the car down a path, while Bergdorf remained near the vehicle, smoking. After 5 or 10 minutes, Bergdorf called them back. They returned to find the field marshal slumped in the back seat, his eyes closed, his body folded forward. The cyanide capsule was empty. His baton had fallen from his hand. Deuss reached in gently and placed the baton back. 20 minutes after the car had left, the telephone rang at the house in Herrlingen. Rommel had suffered a collapse. The voice said he had died. Manfred Rommel put down the phone and said nothing. 4 days later, on October 18, 1944, Germany held a state funeral for its greatest general. The coffin was draped in the German flag. The church in Ulm was filled with senior military officers. Hitler sent a personal wreath and a statement praising Rommel's courage and service to the fatherland. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt delivered the eulogy, his voice measured and formal, saying things that the men in the room were expected to believe. The cause of death was given as complications from the brain injuries sustained in Normandy. A hero's death, a natural death, the death of a soldier. The cameras rolled for the newsreels. The ceremony was filmed, edited, distributed. It was the last propaganda victory Rommel would give the regime that had killed him. His wife and son kept the secret. They had been told to. They had been threatened, in everything but the most explicit words, with what would happen if they did not. It was only after the war, only when the surviving conspirators and their families could speak, only when Manfred Rommel was old enough and safe enough to tell the full story, that the truth came out. That the man being mourned had not died from his wounds. That the wreath from Hitler was sent by the man who had ordered his murder. That the state funeral was the final act of the lie. Manfred Rommel lived until November 2013. He was 84 years old. For nearly 7 decades, he carried the memory of his father's last handshake, the sound of a car disappearing down a country road, the knowledge of what had been done and who had done it, and how the world had been told something else entirely. In Herrlingen today, on the road where the car stopped, there is a memorial stone. It sits at the edge of a quiet field in a place the town was called in 1944, before it was later absorbed into a municipality renamed Blaustein. There are 2 plaques. The first shows the German cross and reads, General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, 14.10.1944. The second was placed there by veterans of the Afrika Korps, men who had followed him across the deserts of Libya and Egypt, men who had watched him lead from the front in conditions that should have destroyed them all. It is made from a piece of a tank. It reads, On this place, on October 14th, Erwin Rommel committed suicide, sacrificed his life for the sake of his family at the hands of Hitler's hangman. They didn't write that he died. They wrote what actually happened. It took a piece of tank armor to tell the truth. If this video gave you something, a story you didn't know, a detail that stayed with you, consider sharing it with someone who would appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment. What aspect of Rommel's story do you think history hasn't fully reckoned with? We read every one.